everybody? This is your boy Dre from Dre's House. I'm here at Silicon Harlem with the CEO and founder, Clayton Banks. I want to thank you for taking the time out to, come talk to me. You've been very busy, even today. So, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to us. Now, there's one thing about you. I heard about you some years ago, and I've been following you. And it's one thing, the first thing that always popped in my mind. Why Silicon Harlem in Harlem?
Well, great question. But even before I explain that, I will also say I'm very grateful to be on your show.
Oh, thank you.
And some of the people that we both know are near and dear to me. So it's really an honor to be here. Well, Silicon Harlem, really, at the end of the day, is about community. And for me, my very first home I bought was in Harlem.
Okay.
And so I've always wanted to make an impact in this upper Manhattan part of New York City. And it turns out that technology wasn't as much of a forefront in Harlem in the early days that I was here. And I thought, what if we could actually bring technology into Harlem, into upper Manhattan, to create perhaps even a tech hub, knowing that the potential was tremendous. A lot of people don't even realize there's 14 colleges in Harlem. That means we have the brain trust here. We have 2 of them are Ivy Leagues. So we have all of this resource. And it made sense to me is we certainly love the culture here, the music, the food, all of the connections that we have. Adding technology to that through Silicon Harlem was a way to start to look at our future and how we look at technology as an economic driver, frankly. Creating new jobs, creating new companies, creating new opportunities. So all of that comes together, and that's why Silicon Harlem focused really hyper-local on Harlem, but now we are expanding across the nation.
Okay. Why is it important for people to learn so much about technology as of today?
So in today's world, we went in the 90s, if you will, we went from an analog world to a digital world, which was really driven by the internet. So when the internet became popular, the internet was an all-digital platform. Prior to that, our world was really analog. Basically satellites in the space that would come down in a type of spectrum that wasn't digitized. When we were able to digitize that spectrum, more information could be then provided to anyone, any corporation, any government, and certainly the citizens. That started to happen across the world. So what that means is new opportunities came upon that. When internet came along, all of a sudden we had social media. When internet came along, all of a sudden we had dating apps. When the internet came along, we had jobs online. You can look for a job, you can get a skill, you can get certified. And the challenge that we have had over that transformation from analog to digital is who all is getting that access.
Right.
And one of the things that we have found that it became a wealth gap in a ways. Like if you had the money, you could get all the access.
Right.
If you didn't have the money, you would be falling behind.
Right.
So it became really important to us and to me personally that technology, if you look at it from just looking out even a year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, it's dominating how our jobs work. You can go from sanitation to the CEO of Google, both have to have some level of digital literacy.
Right.
And so if we don't do it, we're going to leave a whole lot of people behind, which will only hurt this country. So it's so important that we give the access and the exposure to technology to even in low-income places, public housing, all these places, so that we have a thriving economy across this nation and certainly in Harlem.
Okay. So what has been some of the challenges to get Silicon Harlem up and running? What has been some of your challenges?
We are up and running, but the challenges for most startups almost across the nation is the second part of what you need to do. The first part I found was that I needed to make sure people understood what we were trying to do.
Right.
And more importantly, that someone would say, I agree with you, Mr. Banks, and I want to be a part of what you're doing. And so literally get a customer. And so we looked at 5 components that make up an ecosystem for technology, for jobs, for opportunity, for startups, all this kind of stuff. So the 5 things, and everyone who's watching this, I don't share this with everybody.
Uh-oh.
But you've got something special. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to get a pen and paper to write this down, or at least type it in or text it into your phone. Number one, if you're in a city, particularly an urban market, you want the first voice at the desk, and it's not in order here, but one of the voices you want at the desk are your electives. Your local representatives, your city representatives, even your state representatives ought to know who you are. And you want to learn that political language because they have a lot to do with how legislation will impact our business. We often overlook that. That's something that you can do even if you're in the food service or if you're in marketing or if you're in any type of discipline. You're going to want to know who is governing your business.
Okay.
So we took it in our way of working with, at that time, Congressman Charles Rangel, who became one of our great supporters, and we loved working with him. But we got to know all of our electives, from city council to the assembly, of what New York is made of. Having their voice at the table was really good for us. The second piece, we said, boy, 14 colleges in Harlem, we ought to make some relationships on these campuses with some of the professors and faculty that are constantly looking at research. And we wanted to create a relationship at that table on technology research. Okay. So when you guys, when a lot of us are hearing about 5G, I was doing 5G in 2017. Why? Because the 17 and so forth was already on college campuses or in major labs. So we've been able to work with a lot of the academics just to look at different ways of how to provide technology, even from a computer perspective. In fact, that computers are expensive. So we work with them on how to figure out how to do what we call a thin or zero client device so that it's almost free. So there's all these research projects. So that voice is at the table. The third voice we wanted at the table was what we call the private sector, right? So we created relationships with the Google and Facebook and all of these great companies, T-Mobile and Microsoft and Spectrum, all of these telecommunication companies, private sector companies, because they have a stake in the game of making Harlem great. And so we wanted them at the table. Number 4 is what we call stakeholders. These are your churches, your YMCAs, your Boys and Girls Clubs, all these locations that are literally touching the pulse of our citizens every single day. Very important to us. And lastly is just the people of Harlem, right? Where we're sitting right now is in the middle of Harlem. So we walk around all over the place, get to talk to people, get the pulse of the community, and that creates this ecosystem that whenever we have an idea, whenever we want to make a suggestion, whenever we want to even have an event, we go to that table and we sit down with all these 5 voices, and they basically give us the guidance that say, this is a good idea, Clayton. Okay. And that is what's creating a sustainable model here in Upper Manhattan. And I actually encourage anyone to replicate this in your own city.
That's very interesting. I wouldn't even think about going that way, but everything is, with any business, you should go that route. Now, one thing that I was reading about you, you've been involved with a lot of different things, especially with TV, just a whole bunch of things. What are some of the things that you've done before Silicon Harlem?
Well, I've been very fortunate in my career, no question about it. I got into the business through a company called Showtime, which hopefully everybody heard of Showtime before.
That's right.
So for me, going into Showtime, all of a sudden I'm working around movies. Well, I love movies. So it was a very nice job and a great career. I thought I'd be there forever. I was very, very close with the CEO, and I just thought this is my thing. And it was shortly after that, about 4 or 5 years that I spent there. And, being in New York, I had been speaking at a particular event and met a guy who was out of HBO, believe it or not. And he decided to ask me to join a startup. And I thought, no way, I'm good with my Showtime gig, but the fact that the CEO was an African-American male, and I had never seen an African-American male CEO in telecommunications at that time, I was very intrigued. And so as a result, I ended up going into this job, and it was video games. Video games. Yes, we called it Sega Channel. And so this is when Sega was very popular. So we launched Sega Channel, the very first all-digital network in the history of TV. And I'm on that team. I love video games. So here I am, coming from movies that I love. Now I'm playing video games. And it's innovation, technology, brand new. This is when the era of digital was transforming.
Right.
So the rest of the world was still analog, but we had this digital platform. So that, within a couple of years of that, the internet came along. And all of a sudden, even though we raised $30 million right off the bat, we had everything going, beautiful offices, great right here in Midtown, New York City. The internet came along, and our investors all were, what are we doing here now? How do we, so as a result, we ended up having to sell off everything, and I ended up, oddly enough, at Comedy Central. Now, in some ways, I was sort of going back to an analog world. I had seen what the future was, but, you still want to work. So definitely. I went into Comedy Central. It was a fledgling network. It was going downhill. It was only 50% penetrated in the United States. And within 30 days of me being there, we got the South Park script. And so even I, as an executive there, was a little concerned about the language. Even though I know language like that very well. But when you read some of those scripts, it was really dicey.
Right.
We ended up putting that show on late at night and didn't even promote it that much. And almost overnight, it was a hit. And so it really was. I love comedy. I love stand-up. And so here I am having this great career in movies, a great career in video games. Here I am now doing a fun job at a great channel with comedy. We went on from there and hired Jon Stewart, became the host of our late night show. So the whole network was turned over within a year. Within a year, we were 100% penetrated in the United States. And so after all that success, I had in my head, I got to get back to digital. Because as fun as it was, meeting Isaac Hayes, hanging out with all these people, I was pining to get back to the technology and the digital world of telecommunications. So at that time, I was prepared financially and other ways to do my own thing. And that's when I created my very first startup of my own, which is called Ember Media, which went around the world doing multimedia development, all types of digital platforms. And I was one of the few people on earth in a lot of ways that was doing it. So I worked with kings and queens across the world. I worked with President Clinton. We actually worked on a big project on getting kids into college and all this stuff. And it was all digital based. And so from there, that ran its course for 10, 15 years. And I was in a point in my life where I was like, how can I just impact a community? I'm sitting right here in Harlem. What am I doing? And that's how Silicon Harlem got created.
Okay. I like that. Now, you kind of answered my next question and stuff, what is your passion? But we know it's movies, comedy, video games, and building businesses.
And community.
So that kind of just alleviated that question.
Well, it's a good thing that you point on it, because one of the things I'm finding is that one of the greatest things in my career, which have been a lot of great things in career, there's no question about it, a lot of great things, but to me, nothing could be more greater in my particular career at this point, is being able to move communities forward. Make sure that the ongoing way of creating disparity amongst communities no longer has to be that way. One way, this comes down to another philosophy of mine. You mind if I talk about this? So here's a philosophy that I hope everybody can embrace. I think anyone will agree with me in a lot of ways, but you may not have heard it in this particular sequence. It's a two-sided coin, right? So if you have a lack of exposure, you have a lack of access. If you have a lack of access, you have a lack of opportunity.
Okay.
If you have a lack of opportunity, it's a recipe for poverty. And that's cyclical. So the question you would ask me, right, is what's the solution? Well, here's the good news. I can give you the solution right on this particular show right now. I'm going to give you the actual solution.
Listen up.
You always hear the problem, lots of problems. Probably even heard the problem I just articulated, that access is a problem. Well, here's the solution. Exposure, access, opportunity, result. The good news is if you have exposure, like I have, when you have access, which I've had, when you have lots of opportunity, which I've been blessed enough, I have sustainability, financially, physically, all types of different things.
Mm-hmm.
What is the solution, Clayton? The solution is real simple. Give people more exposure. That's all it is. Stop making it difficult. Give people exposure. When we see in Harlem and in a lot of cities where young people are running around on motorbikes and making all that noise and popping wheelies on main streets and everything, and everybody's getting them off the street, destroy. No. They're mechanical engineers. They just don't have the title. They haven't had the access. If they did, they could put a rocket on the moon. But we demonize their intelligence rather than embracing it and saying, why don't we give them the exposure that they need with that intelligence, give them the access to the tools that they may need, make sure there's an opportunity like a job or a company or some way, or maybe even an investment, and let them sustain themselves. We have to rethink how we look at people. I go into public housing. I go in a lot because I serve those locations. And you'll find that there's brilliant people in public housing, as there is everywhere in the world. And more importantly, understanding, how to move and groove given the lack of access to more money. So they're able to navigate the world on a budget. They navigate a world on a lot of things that we may be taking for granted. If we can give more people more exposure, more access, more opportunity, everyone wins. That's the good news. Nobody has to, I'm rich. If you're going to help those people, am I going to become poor? Or do I have to give up something for them to? No! And that's why I'm here through Silicon Harlem, to make that voice loud that everyone wins. One last example. If you look at sidewalks, there are these mini ramps on just about every sidewalk. Some sort of way. Well, why did that happen? It's because people in wheelchairs couldn't get up and down sidewalks.
Right.
You used to have to help them up. And it took 20 years for that legislation to be approved to where every new sidewalk would have to have. Now you can't go almost anywhere in the United States without seeing these ramps. Well, who did it help? Certainly help people in wheelchairs. But if you're pulling a baby or pushing a baby, you're looking for the ramp. If you're pulling your luggage, you're looking for that ramp. And some of us don't even feel like stepping up a curb anyway. So I still walk to that ramp. So my point is, when you do the best, if you do the best you can for the least of us, it helps all of us.
That's a very interesting way to even think of that, because I would have never thought that way. Because I look at it like, you can give opportunities to people. How do you go about letting these people know the opportunities there, or get them involved? Because a lot of people is like, that's not going to be for me. How do you get them to understand this can help them?
Well, it's a great question, and it's maybe the wild factor to it. But I believe in people. I 100% believe in people. I think if you give them the exposure, that's the first piece you got to do. If they've never seen African American CEO, they can't even almost think about it as a opportunity if they're African American themselves.
Right.
So some of this is just exposure. When they see me, I've had kids tell me, "You're the first CEO I've ever met, Mr. Banks." Really? Well, I'm proud of that, and I'm not proud of it. I'm proud that they met someone that thought, they could respect. At the same time, why don't they know? I grew up in areas where everybody knew a CEO, like either their father or somebody like that, and so it's not mystifying me. Versus, if you don't know about something, if you can't get access to it, of course your opportunities are smashed, and you serve in exactly as you described that. That's not going to be for me. I'm not going to. Because, now, what has happened greatly is the digital world has made it more easy to see, right? You can go online and see what others are doing. We've got to do more than that. Our public schools have to do more than that. We have to ensure that people are getting the same level of, you don't have to have the exact same exposure, but the same level of exposure.
Right.
And that will, and from there, I believe the individual will take it from there, right? When I always believe this. Intelligence in general, I've been all over the world. Intelligence is distributed everywhere evenly. There's smart and dumb people no matter where you are. Sorry. There's smart and dumb people no matter where you are. But it's distributed evenly. But access and exposure is not. That's the only difference.
Okay. So, being that you're saying that, why is it so important for kids at a young age to get, to be taught like STEM or STEAM? Why is it important that they get involved with that at a young age?
Well, it's a great question. It's because of the future jobs. If you look at the future jobs of the world, particularly in America, your STEM learning is essential, almost as learning English and mathematics. So this is an essential way to prepare yourself for the future jobs. Artificial intelligence that you hear quite a bit. AI, artificial intelligence, is here now. The question is who's building it? Who's creating it? Who's maintaining it? Who's scaling it? Who's pricing it? If you don't have that skill set growing up, you're going to be out of the loop, if you will. If you look at virtuality, all the things are becoming more and more virtual, right? Even just school. You have to have that muscle in order to be thriving in that environment. Autonomy, which is what my conversation is on what I call the next revolution, is defined by autonomy and virtuality. Autonomy meaning driverless cars, driverless buses, driverless trains, driverless everything, or autonomy everything. When you're looking at that type of environment, who's got those jobs? Who's creating it? Who's thinking about it? Who's maintaining it? Who's scaling it? Who's pricing it? Who's doing all that? Who's selling it? Who's owning it? All those things are now up for grabs. So make sure that everyone has that access and exposure. If your school is teaching young people XR, and the other school is not teaching XR, that school has an advantage. And then your question would be, what's XR? Because everyone wants to know, what is XR?
That was my question.
So XR is extended reality, where you're walking down the street and there's a virtual person with you. And so there's these new technologies that are coming fast and furious, and we have to know about them and learn about them and certainly be involved in them.
That's very interesting because even at my old high school, and I went to visit, they had robotics. And that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Cause we had like drafting and wood shop or whatever. But it was doing, and won a few competitions. That was amazing to me to be like a very urban school, which I wouldn't think that because I'm looking at technology, robotics, all that science stuff, which is so important, is going to these urban schools, which a lot of people think that's not. So I think it's very important that even as parents, we get our kids involved. Not so much in the video games, but it's a lot of other stuff they can get involved with.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I want to just help, or at least build on what you said, just particularly about robotics. The robots are not like, these things walking around the street. So everyone has robots. Everyone, all of us have a robot in some ways. Robotics is built into your cell phone. All right, and I can remember early on when these voice robots were coming out, and I can't use the names because something might just start talking in here because I got all kind of stuff in here. But when you look at robots or even AI, for example, when I first got one of the early phones, the first thing you want to know is what's the weather, and so I would say every morning, what's the weather, and the voice would come back and say, well, it's 20. I'm going, there's summer out here. What are you talking about? Well, they were giving me 20 degrees
Celsius.
in Celsius.
Yeah.
So I realized that, and I started saying, give me the weather in Fahrenheit. And sure enough, hey, it's 72 degrees. And I was like, oh, this is great. So next couple of days, please give me the weather in Fahrenheit. Fourth time it said, you don't have to tell me Fahrenheit no more. Literally said that to me. I almost threw the phone out the door.
Yeah.
I was like...
That'd have been interesting.
Because it learned my behavior. That's what robotics can do. That's what AI can do, is can record the common things, take out what's not, and start to provide you a more efficient life. So that's why we have to teach these young people now, so that they can be making the future beyond AI and beyond robotics and beyond virtuality and beyond autonomy. There's more to come. One of them that I challenge everybody to think about is what we call space technology. There's a whole frontier of space to be explored. And why do I say that? One of the most maybe not even taken for granted, but just, I don't know, people may not realize that. Well, let me ask you a question.
All right. Here we go.
What's your thinking about GPS? Have you ever used GPS?
Yes.
Exactly. Right? So everyone knows GPS. You know how long that technology's been around? 80s, maybe. Right?
But that's when they had the box thing, like you put in your car.
That's when you first versions of it. You're really dating yourself. Be careful. So you're looking at a technology that's not even that old. It's not like 1,000 years old. It's 20, 30 years. And yet everyone has it. That technology came straight from space. It's all from space because of the satellites and all that stuff. So that frontier, in my opinion, is something that all of us should be paying attention to. Another one is genetics. And all types of things are coming on that will be great jobs, great opportunities, great for so many of the young people today.
Okay. Now, I was reading an article about broadband coming to Harlem, like free or something like that. Can you explain more about that?
Well, there's a very big movement on creating what we call affordable broadband.
Okay.
And the reason why that is that we're finding in a lot of low-income areas and in public housing, frankly, that it's as high as 40% of people that don't have internet in the home.
Yeah.
That's a tragedy. A lot of those homes have kids in them. So 40% of people that don't have in some parts of New York City could be up to 50%. So what we found through COVID and the pandemic is everyone needs a connection. You know, no matter what. There are a lot of people dying in Harlem because they couldn't get to the hospital. The hospitals weren't letting some people in some ways, and certainly couldn't do the virtual, telehealth. So we can't let that continue, right? We have to make sure that people are connected and are able to get to the services they need. One way to do that, lower the cost. I mean, it's not like the wires aren't there. The question is, can people afford it? So that's why I think the country is going, hey, we got to figure out this. How do we make sure everyone's connected, it's fair, that it's sustainable, all those type of things. And so it's not just me, but a lot of people working on this particular challenge. And there are ways to do it. And so I think we're in that sort of era of change. And that's what should happen after a crisis like COVID. Innovation should really just expand across our nation. And one of the first parts of that is broadband.
Right. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. So, what's up next for Silicon Harlem, and what's next for Clayton Banks?
For Silicon Harlem, our commitment is to ensure everyone's connected within the next 5 years. That everyone is connected at minimum in Upper Manhattan. We're going to try to do it for all of New York City. But we believe that everyone, no matter where you are in the socioeconomic ladder, should have it connected to broadband. Seems essential to me. So we're working really hard on doing that, and that's going to take some years for us to do. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of effort. It's no easy thing. But we also don't think it's just going to be us doing it. So that's the good news. We want lots of people in this space because it brings costs down when there's competition and all those type of things. For me personally, the rest of my years that I have trying to, do the best that I possibly can do will always be based around helping people get more access to technology, more exposure to technology, more opportunity to technology, and I'm going to do my best to make sure people can be sustainable financially. My first cut of that will be focused on African American women. I believe that if you can bolster the African women's health, wealth, and everything else, you fix the country.
Yeah.
So I'm putting a lot of
club.
effort for the next few years on ensuring that we're doing the best we can for all of us.
Okay, I like that. So if somebody wanted to know what's going on with Silicon Harlem or wanted to contact you, where could they contact you at?
First of all, go to siliconharlem.com. Second of all, I didn't mention one other thing. On October 22nd, write it down, October 22nd, 2021, Silicon Harlem is having its annual summit. It's our 8th year doing it. And the theme, the theme is Beyond Connected. What happens when everyone is connected? What will that world look like? I have some vision on that. We've got people like one of the founders of the internet will be speaking at our conference. It's not Al Gore. It was actually Dr. Vince Cerf.
Okay.
We have some tremendous voices from T-Mobile, from Microsoft. A bunch of people are coming, and and by the way, it's free. So all you have to do is go to siliconharlem.com, and you'll find the links and everything else. And as well, we'd like to hear your voice at that summit. So please join us on October 22nd of 2021.
And there it is. I want to thank you for taking the time out. I know you're busy. You got to run around and keep this place going, make sure people get connected, educate. So I appreciate you taking the time just even to hang out with me and talk about some things.
It's a pleasure, and keep up the good work, man.
I'm going to try.
Keep it up.
I'm going to try.
All right.
There it is. Clayton Banks, Dre's House. We catch you on the next one.